The morning of my wedding, I sat in front of the mirror, my white dress spread around me like a cloud I thought would carry me into happiness. My hands shook as I adjusted the veil. I wasn't nervous about marrying David. He had been my anchor, my only real safe place in a world that treated me like a burden. I was nervous because in my heart, I still hoped my family would finally show me love. For weeks, I'd sent them the invitations. I even went to my parents' house with my fiancé, begging them to come. Dad had leaned back in his chair, his beer can dripping condensation onto the carpet, and smirked. "Why would we waste a Saturday watching you play bride?" he sneered. "Your sister's high school reunion is the same day. That's a real event. People actually care about that. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video." Mom cackled like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "Besides," she added, pointing her long nails at me, "a wedding without class is just two losers signing papers. What's there to celebrate? You're not worth the gas money to get there." My sister Madison had chimed in, twirling the diamond necklace Dad bought her. "Imagine everyone staring at you in that cheap dress. Embarrassing. If you had any sense, you'd cancel the whole thing." I stood there stunned, the invitation slipping out of my hand. David squeezed my shoulder, but I could feel his anger boiling. My family didn't even hide their cruelty anymore. They didn't just decline, they mocked me for even asking. Still, deep down, I prayed they'd change their minds. I told myself maybe they'd surprise me at the ceremony. Maybe they'd sit in the back and clap when we kissed. That hope is what got me dressed that morning. The chapel was glowing with candles, the air filled with flowers David's mother arranged herself. His family filled the pews, his cousins, aunts, uncles, all smiling at me with genuine warmth. But the right side of the church, the side reserved for my family, was empty. Row after row of polished wood, vacant and mocking. The officiant whispered, "Shall we wait a few more minutes?" I nodded, my throat tight. I stared at the doors, expecting them to swing open any second. I imagined my parents walking in late, pretending they cared, but the doors never moved. Instead, my phone buzzed in the clutch purse beside me. A text from Mom. I opened it with trembling hands. "Don't embarrass yourself waiting for us. We're having a family barbecue at your aunt's. Madison's telling everyone about how pathetic you looked begging us to come. It's hilarious. Good luck with your little party." I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it had collapsed. My wedding day, the one day I thought they couldn't ignore me, had been reduced to a joke at a backyard barbecue. David touched my hand, his eyes burning with fury but also with something else. Pity. And that pity cut deeper than my parents' words. I didn't want him to pity me. I wanted him to see me as strong. But all I could see when I looked at the empty seats was proof that my family never saw me as anything more than disposable. They hadn't even tried to hide it. They laughed while I walked down the aisle alone, my veil blurring the tears that wouldn't stop falling. The photographer snapped pictures anyway, trying to angle it so the empty pews weren't visible. But I knew, I would always know. And when the vows were spoken, when David said "I do," I forced a smile through my tears, because in that moment, something inside me cracked, not just from heartbreak, but from rage. As guests clapped and music swelled, I stared at those empty seats and swore under my breath, "They think today is worthless. I'll make sure they regret every second they weren't here." The reception hall should have been filled with laughter, the sound of clinking glasses, and the buzz of two families coming together. Instead, I stood under the soft glow of string lights, every toast from David's relatives reminding me of the silence on my side. I smiled politely, but inside my blood burned. Every time someone lifted a glass and said, "To the bride and groom," I imagined Mom's face, smirking as she piled food onto her plate at the barbecue. I pictured Dad with his beer, raising it not for me, but for my sister's stories about how pathetic I must have looked walking down the aisle alone. David leaned close during our first dance, his voice low. "They don't deserve you. Forget them." But how could I forget? Forgetting was what I'd done all my life. Pretend their words didn't sting. Pretend their favoritism didn't crush me. This wasn't forgetting. This was public humiliation. Every guest saw that empty side of the church. They saw the absence that screamed louder than any applause. When the night ended, David and I drove away in his car, tin cans rattling behind us. His family waved, shouting blessings, but in the rearview mirror, I didn't see joy. I saw rows of empty chairs mocking me. That night, after we checked into the small cabin David rented for our honeymoon, I sat on the bed still in my wedding dress. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. "Did you really go through with it? Poor guy. He doesn't know what he married. We did him a favor not showing up. Madison says you looked desperate, standing there waiting. Wish we could have seen it in person." The screen blurred as my tears spilled over, but my hands didn't shake anymore. They were steady. I realized something. They weren't just cruel. They enjoyed it. They fed off my pain. David took my phone gently, reading the message, his jaw tightening. "You don't need them," he whispered. But I pulled the phone back. No, I needed this. I needed proof of every word. Not to beg them to love me, but to carve into my memory the exact moment I stopped being their victim. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to settle into married life. David was patient, but I knew he felt helpless. He wanted to protect me, but this wasn't something he could shield me from. The wound wasn't just abandonment. It was decades of being told I was nothing, sealed by the ultimate betrayal on my wedding day. And my parents didn't stop. They called sometimes, not to check on me, but to brag. "Madison just got promoted. She deserves it, unlike you." Or, "Your wedding must have been small. Lucky you had his family to fill the seats." Every word was a dagger, twisted with glee. I'd hang up and sit in silence, staring at the walls of the tiny apartment David and I rented. The anger kept building, louder than the hum of the refrigerator, sharper than the shadows that crept in when the lights went out. I started to remember things I'd buried. Dad stepping over me when I fell as a kid, muttering, "Get up, garbage!" Mom telling relatives, "Madison is our pride. Our other daughter, well, she tries." The wedding wasn't the beginning. It was the final confirmation. They had never seen me as their child, just as the butt of their jokes, the servant to their golden girl. One night, as David slept beside me, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my reflection in a half-empty glass of water. My face looked different, harder, stronger. I whispered to myself. They laughed. They made a joke out of my wedding day, but I'll give them something they won't be able to laugh about. That night, the idea of revenge stopped being a fleeting thought and became a vow. Not poetic, not symbolic, real. Something they would feel, something that would rip away the comfort they thought they'd always have. And for the first time in my life, I felt calm. The day of my breaking point came 6 months after the wedding. David and I had built a fragile peace in our tiny apartment, but my parents never let me breathe. Every few days, I'd get another jab, another reminder that I was the trash they had to sweep aside. Then came the phone call. Mom's voice, syrupy sweet. "Your sister's engagement party is next month. We'll need some money from you. Since your wedding was such a disappointment, the least you can do is help fund Madison's big night." I stayed silent, my nails digging into the table. Mom laughed, sharp and cruel. "Oh, don't sulk. Think of it as finally being useful. You'll never be celebrated, but you can at least pay for someone who matters." She hung up before I could respond. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat with a notebook, writing line after line of every insult, every slight, every time they had turned their backs. When I reached the part about my wedding day, the empty chairs, the cruel texts, I drew a thick line under it. Then I wrote one word in block letters: payback. I started small. Madison's fiancé worked at a corporate law firm. I found out, through quiet research, that one of his biggest cases was being handled sloppily. I didn't expose him outright. No, I made anonymous calls, slipped evidence to the opposing side, just enough to plant doubt. By the end of the month, his reputation was stained, whispers running through the office. Madison's perfect engagement no longer looked so shiny. But my parents? They were harder. Their weakness wasn't their jobs, it was their obsession with appearances. They wanted the world to believe they were the proudest, most successful parents alive. Every Sunday, they hosted dinners with neighbors, showing off Madison's accomplishments. So I showed up one Sunday. No invitation, no warning. I walked into their backyard while the grill smoked and guests sipped wine. The chatter died instantly. Mom's smile froze. Dad's beer nearly slipped from his hand. "Well," I said loudly, eyes sweeping the crowd, "the proud parents of the year. Let me tell you what they were doing on my wedding day while their chairs sat empty." Gasps rippled as I told the story. Every detail, the barbecue, the texts, the laughter. I watched their guests' faces change from polite interest to disgust. Mom hissed, "You little snake!" I cut her off. "Snake? At least a snake knows loyalty. You two wouldn't recognize it if it strangled you." Dad tried to grab my arm, but I yanked free. "Careful," I said, my voice low but sharp enough for everyone to hear. "Lay a hand on me again, and I'll tell them what you did to me as a kid. Step over your own bleeding daughter because Madison's shopping bags were more important." The silence was deafening. Their neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Someone set down a glass with a hard clink. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my parents' eyes, not because of what I might do to them physically, but because their kingdom of lies was collapsing in front of witnesses. But I wasn't done. 2 weeks later, at Madison's engagement party, the event they begged me to fund, I walked in again. This time, I carried a small envelope. Inside was the proof I'd been collecting, financial documents showing how my parents had siphoned money from joint accounts I helped pay into for 9 years. Debts I had covered, vacations they had enjoyed, all while mocking me. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed the envelope on the table in front of Madison's fiancé's parents, who prided themselves on their high moral standards. "This," I said evenly, "is who you're tying your family to. People who would sell out their own blood, abandon her on her wedding day, and drain her dry while laughing about it." The room erupted. Madison shouted, her fiancé's parents demanded explanations, and my mother tried to snatch the papers back. I didn't stay to watch the meltdown. I walked out into the night air, my steps light. By morning, calls poured in. The engagement was postponed indefinitely. Their neighbors stopped attending Sunday dinners. Dad's job at the country club evaporated after whispers spread. Mom's social circle crumbled, invitations drying up. Madison stopped posting her perfect photos online. And my parents? They called me, over and over, first with rage, then with pleading. "Fix this," Dad growled. "We're your parents." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You're just strangers who taught me cruelty better than love. Now you get to live with the lessons you gave me." I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight lift. Not because I had destroyed them out of spite, but because I had finally reclaimed the power they stole from me. They thought my wedding day humiliation would be the end of me. But in truth, it was the day I began writing their downfall. And this time, they weren't laughing. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.